Hi, my name is Kelly Costello,
And I'm Chloe Buenrostro.
and our topic is the genocide in South Sudan.
Our research question is, to what extent has the citizens of South Sudan been affected by the genocide?
Our thesis is, if proper reconciliation and relief is carried out, then the impending genocide of South Sudan may be improved.
For most of the 20th century, British colonial rulers viewed the North and South Sudan as separate entities. The First Sudanese Civil War, which was from 1955 to 1972, this was prompted by angry Southerners who have been prompted and then denied regional autonomy, and regional autonomy is a decentralization of governance to outlying regions. This resulted in the deaths of 500,000 people who were mostly civilians and forced hundreds of thousands to flee from their homes. In 1972, the Addis Ababa Agreement was made. This negotiated peace between the southern rebels known as Anyanya Khartoum, which included power-sharing agreements, security guarantees, and political economic autonomy for the South. In 1983, the Sudanese president Jafar al-Numeri introduced legal measures that abolished southern governing autonomy. This gave power to Khartoum, which declared Arabic as the official language and imposed Sharia law. After nearly 2 decades of civil war, South Sudan seceded from Sudan in 2011. Prior to independence, the violence drove millions of southern Sudanese from their homes since gaining independence on July 9, 2011. This made governmental corruption, intercommunal violence, fighting between the rebel militia and the government, and border conflicts with Sudan have occurred. Fighting in Jonglei, South Sudan has displaced tens of thousands and cut off life-saving aid to more than 100,000 people. The civil war between the north and the south of Sudan resulted in the deaths of the estimated about 2 million people and displaced an additional 4 million. Nearly 20,000 people have fled to Malut since fighting between the rival government factions broke out last December. In total, more than 1 million people have fled their homes, and with their rainy season starting, more than a third of the population, which is 3.7 million people, are already facing emergency and crisis levels of hunger. The capital of Jonglei State, to south of Sudan, had 200 armed men in civilian clothing stormed a UN base where more than 5,000 civilians have taken refugees. More than 50 people reported to have been killed. Nearly 1 in every 3 schools in South Sudan has been destroyed, damaged, occupied, or closed, impacting the education of more than 900,000 children, including some 350,000 who have been forced out of school. More than 686,200 children under the age of 5 are estimated to be acutely malnourished, including more than 231,300 who are severely malnourished. Between 15,000 to 16,000 children are estimated to be recruited by armed actors in South Sudan. Responses have also been made to the relations of the South Sudan genocide. Relief agencies are fighting a desperate battle to alert the outside world to the scale of the impending disaster. Another response was the 2016 South Sudan Humanitarian Response Plan. Humanitarian partners aim to respond to the most life-threatening needs of 5.1 million people out of an estimated 6.1 million in need of protection and assistance across South Sudan. In 2012, the Sudan's People Liberation Movement, or SPLM, shut down the oil wells so that oil could not flow into pipelines that pass through Sudan. The international community has been heavily involved in South Sudan, providing the new country with around $1 billion in aid each year, covering food, drugs, textbooks, security training, and emergency humanitarian assistance. The United Nations has a mission in South Sudan, which is UNMISS, consisting of over 10,000 personnel that have attempted to improve government in the new nation and establish peace and security, including in the troubled Jonglei State. Unknown thousands of fighters and civilians have been killed, and terrible massacres have been perpetrated in both sides. In response, the United States and the European nation have issued limited sanctions designations against military commanders on both sides for mass atrocities, human rights violations, and the obstruction of the peace process. Although UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon has pushed for punitive measures against those obstructing the peace, the UN Security Council has yet to act. Diplomats say that they are deferring to the IGAT, the regional body leading negotiations, on when to enact sanctions in order to avoid upsetting ongoing negotiations.
The aftermath of South Sudan genocide continues to put its citizens at risk. The countries continue to share a great deal of history between each other despite the past, including migration, trade, cross-border interests, resource development, and its rich oil areas. Because of the aftermath of the genocide, the Southerners distrust the Northerners as a result of the long history of violence and fear of continuing interference. South Sudan's large oil reserve is one of their main sources of economy. However, because of the tensions over the region of Abyei, it threatens the economic well-being as well as the security of the country. Large amounts of the population have also been greatly affected. There has been a humanitarian crisis in the Nuba Mountains of South Kordofan, which is near the border of South Sudan and Sudan. There was civil war between the government of Sudan and rebels from the Sudan's People's Movement. Not only has the violence affected the people, but they also fled due to widespread famine from the government of Sudan denying aid to the people in the mountains. Because of the history and few examples of good practices, South Sudan continues to have difficulties creating a stable foundation for a democratic system in their region. The Lu Nuer and the Merle are two different tribal groups that have experienced intertribal conflict due to the aftermath of the genocide. As part of the traditional dowry system, many men would steal cattle from the other tribes to help the bridal payments. This caused uproar, and the Merle tribe attacked the Lu Nuer livestock and village. The first sign of reconciliation started when it officially ended with the Comprehensive Peace Agreement in 2005. This treaty was successfully signed by the North and the South. The agreement allowed the citizens to decide whether they wanted to stay as a unified Sudan or separate into an independent country. On January 11th, the majority of the citizens voted for independence and South Sudan became a new country. One turning point was in December 2013 when there was political dispute between President Salva Kiir and the former Vice President Riek Machar regarding ethnic tensions. This sparked the start of the civil war between the rebel fighters and government troops. The level of violence that South Sudan has suffered has led organizations like the United Nations Mission to South Sudan, Amnesty International, and Human Rights Watch to believe that war crimes have been taking place against humanity in South Sudan. Another turning point and sign of reconciliation was when the Intergovernmental Authority on Development conducted 6 rounds of peace talks to help cease the fighting. The first round of talks focused on cessation of hostilities agreement. However, both parties violated the agreements. The second and third round of talks authorized an IGAD protection and deterrent force for the purpose of monitoring and enforcing a ceasefire. The fourth round focused on forming a transitional unity government. However, this has proven extremely difficult because of the opposing views of the citizens of South Sudan. The fifth round of negotiations also failed because the opposing side refused to participate in the talk, bringing the peace talks to a standstill, reaching no final agreements. The global politics course concept of human rights are the basic entitlements that everyone should be able to have, essentially being a human being. This course concept relates to the South Sudan genocide because innocent citizens living in South Sudan are being greatly affected by the actions of others. Many citizens of South Sudan were being targeted based off of their ethnicity, and this is a violation of their human rights. Other countries have also realized the violation of human rights in South Sudan. For example, the United States made a statement on the behalf of the European Union, Norway, and Britain, stating that they will impose sanctions on any party that chooses not to obey the laws. Another course concept that is evident is development. Development is an IB global politic concept. South Sudan faces immense development changes, currently ranking near the bottom of the Human Development Index, with nearly 90% of the population illiterate. 75% of the population has no access to health services, and 30% do not have access to clean drinking water. We must work towards the development of South Sudan in order to cease the impending genocide. Thank you.
Thank you.